Anchorage, Alaska, a city wedged between the Chugach Mountains and Cook Inlet, where the wilderness doesn't just surround you, it swallows you whole. And beneath all that rugged beauty lies something darker, a long, unresolved list of questions that nobody has been able to answer. Today we're counting down the top 20 greatest unsolved mysteries of Anchorage, Alaska. Mystery 20. The vanishing of Jael Tiara Hamblin. On the night of October 11th, 2014, Jael Tiara Hamblin went out with her roommate, Kendra Vincent Estrada, for dinner. The children were being looked after. It was a normal evening until it wasn't. After they returned home and Kendra went to bed, Jael decided to go out again. She'd been rejected by a man she'd been interested in that night, and at 1:40 a.m., she sent a text to a male friend. That was nearly her last communication. Her final text was sent just over 2 hours later, and then silence. The following morning, Kendra woke to find Jael's bed unmade and her car still in the driveway. Texts went unanswered all day because, by that point, Jael's phone had died. 5 months later, her purse was found buried in snow just outside Anchorage. Her remains have never been found, and no one has ever been charged. The case sits in that frustrating category of mysteries where there's just enough evidence to haunt you, but not enough to resolve anything. Mystery 19. The death of Muriel. Feel at Snow City Cafe. Snow City Cafe, a beloved breakfast and lunch spot in downtown Anchorage, has been drawing locals and visitors since 1998. But behind its cheerful reputation sits a story that predates the cafe by decades. Muriel Pfeil was the owner of the first travel agency in Anchorage, operating from the very building where Snow City Cafe now stands. She was murdered on those premises, and the case was never solved. Some longtime Anchorage residents and cafe regulars claim her presence is still felt there, a playful, restless energy that lingers in the space. Whatever you make of that, the fact remains. Her killer was never identified, and the full circumstances of her death remain unclear to this day. It's the kind of case that gets absorbed into a city's DNA, a name attached to a building, a story told in hushed tones, a woman who deserved justice and never received it. Mystery 18. The unsolved shooting of Douglas Cleaves. In the early morning hours of October 19th, 1985, Anchorage police responded to a shooting on the 8,900 block of Forest Village Drive. When they arrived, they found 25-year-old Douglas Cleaves dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Witnesses described what had happened. Just after midnight, someone knocked on the door of the residence. When a family member opened it, they were confronted by a person wearing a mask, gloves, and a tan-colored trench coat, armed with a rifle. The shooter stepped inside, fired multiple rounds at Cleaves, then turned and walked away. Despite the witnesses, despite the detail about the trench coat and mask, despite everything, no one was ever arrested. The case has sat open for over 40 years. Anchorage Crime Stoppers has periodically called for information, but as of today, no one has been held accountable for what was clearly a deliberate, targeted killing. Whoever knocked on that door that night has apparently never faced consequences. Mystery 17. The disappearance of Thomas Newsy. Thomas Anthony Newsy was a traveling nurse who moved across Alaska, picking up shifts in different towns, never staying anywhere too long. He rented no apartment, just a storage unit in Anchorage. In 2001, while staying at a Super 8 motel in Anchorage, he simply didn't show up for his next scheduled shift in Bethel, Alaska. His employer flagged it. Investigators were notified. And then the trail went cold. No body has ever been recovered. No credible explanation has been established. Given that Newsy was deliberately transient by nature, tracking his movements was initially difficult. But the complete absence of any trace, no financial activity, no contact with anyone who knew him, has left investigators without answers for more than 2 decades. Making it stranger, when Newsy's friend called his motel room after he went missing, a man who sounded nothing like Newsy answered the phone, then passed it to a woman who said Thomas had checked out. The housekeeper told his nephew that a young woman had answered the door when she knocked. Who those people were has never been explained. Mystery 16. The Lanache Zimmer homicide. On the morning of December 5, 2019, Anchorage police were called to a stolen Mazda sedan abandoned on Sitka Street in East Anchorage. Inside, they found 27-year-old Lanache Zimmer, dead from homicide. The car was stolen. The circumstances leading up to her death remain unknown. And despite years of appeals from Anchorage Crime Stoppers and the APD, no one has been charged. What makes this case particularly haunting is how little is publicly known. Someone abandoned that car, walked away, and, as far as the public record shows, has never faced accountability. Lanache Zimmer was 27 years old. That's the whole story, and it remains unfinished. Mystery 15. The death of Ayelet Hansen. On January 23, 2014, Anchorage police found 31-year-old Ayelet Hansen dead inside his vehicle in a parking lot at the 2600 block of Spennard Road. He had died from a gunshot wound. The circumstances leading up to his death were unknown then, and they remain unknown now. The APD has classified it as a homicide and has requested public assistance on multiple occasions. Spennard Road in 2014 was not a quiet stretch of Anchorage. It was a well-trafficked area, and yet no witness has come forward with anything that led to an arrest. Hansen's case is a reminder that some murders happen in plain sight, in populated areas, and still go unsolved for years. Mystery 14. Cassandra Boskovsky and the MMIP crisis. In 2019, a woman named Valerie Kassler stole a cell phone from a man she knew in Anchorage. What she found on it was so disturbing, she brought it to police. Graphic recordings showing the torture and murder of a woman, with a voice narrating over it, saying, "In my movies, everybody always dies." That man was Brian Stephen Smith, a South African national living in Anchorage. He was arrested in October 2019 and eventually convicted in 2024 of murdering 2 Alaska Native women, Kathleen Jo Henry, 30, and Veronica Abachuk, 52, and sentenced to 226 years in prison. But the case didn't end there. During Smith's sentencing, MMIP advocates examining court documents found graphic photos of what appeared to be a third victim, photos that Anchorage police had possessed for years and never publicized. Advocates identified the woman almost immediately as Cassandra Boskovsky, a Native woman who had been reported missing in Anchorage in 2019. Her family recognized her within an hour of seeing the images. The APD said they could not confirm her identity without forensic evidence and had not contacted the family because they didn't want to cause grief without certainty. Her cousin Marcella Boskovsky Grounds, who had filed the missing persons report, said of that explanation, "She didn't matter. That's how I felt, like she didn't matter to them." In 2024, a jury in a presumptive death hearing ruled Cassandra Boskovsky's death a homicide. Her remains have never been found. Smith has denied killing her, and the case remains open with no charges filed. MMIP advocates have also pointed to additional women appearing in photos on Smith's devices who have never been identified or publicly discussed by police. The broader crisis this case represents is documented and severe. Alaska ranks 4th in the nation for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and Anchorage has ranked 3rd among U.S. cities. Indigenous women in Alaska are murdered at rates more than 10 times that of white women in the state. Retired APD officer and MMIP advocate Michael Livingston has described an unspoken culture within law enforcement, NHI, no human involved, when calls came in involving certain victims. "We should see homicides across the state treated equally," he said. "We don't. How many cases like Cassandra Boskovsky's exist in Anchorage? Open, under-prioritized, and unresolved is itself an unanswered question." Mystery 13. The Ghost of Ship Creek, Marie. Ship Creek in downtown Anchorage is best known as one of the most accessible urban salmon fishing spots in the country. What it's less known for is the story of a woman named Marie, a native Alaskan woman who was murdered in the area in 1987. Her case was never solved. Locals, particularly those who spend time near the creek after dark, have reported hearing a woman's cries and seeing an apparition running alongside the water. According to the accounts, she appears most frequently to homeless individuals in the area, as if warning them away. Whatever one makes of those reports, the factual core is undeniable. A woman was murdered at Ship Creek in 1987, and her killer was never identified. The paranormal elements aside, that's simply an unresolved homicide that has never received the attention it deserves. Mystery 12, the JAL Flight 1628 UFO Encounter. On November 17, 1986, Japan Airlines Cargo Flight Me 628 was en route from Paris to Tokyo, making a scheduled transit across Alaska with a layover in Anchorage. The crew, Captain Kenju Terauchi, a former fighter pilot with 29 years of experience, First Officer Takanori Tamafuji, and flight engineer Yoshio Tsukuba, were flying at 35,000 feet when things got strange. At approximately 5:11 p.m., Alaska time, near Fort Yukon, Terauchi noticed lights pacing his aircraft. He described two smaller objects, and then, trailing behind them, something enormous. An object he would later describe as roughly the size of two aircraft carriers. The crew was alarmed enough that Terauchi radioed the Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control Center. Controllers coordinated with military radar at Elmendorf Air Force Base. A United Airlines flight and a military C-130 were rerouted to attempt visual confirmation, but neither crew saw anything out of the ordinary. The objects, according to Terauchi, disappeared precisely when the United flight came close. The encounter lasted around 50 minutes before the plane landed safely in Anchorage. The FAA launched an official investigation. At least one Anchorage air traffic controller later stated that multiple controllers had seen a target come and go on radar near the JAL flight and were convinced it wasn't a glitch. However, the FAA ultimately characterized the radar returns as likely a split image of the aircraft itself. Captain Terauchi was grounded not long after, though he was later reinstated. Skeptics have argued the crew saw the planets Jupiter and Mars visible that night and potentially misidentified from altitude. Believers point to the duration, the radar data, and the experience level of the crew. Nearly 4 decades later, there is still no universally agreed-upon explanation for what JAL Flight 1628 encountered in the skies above Alaska that November night. Mystery 11. Eklutna Annie, still unidentified. Of all the chilling legacies left behind by serial killer Robert Hansen, one stands apart. A woman known only as Eklutna Annie. Her remains were discovered on July 21, 1980, buried near a power line in a wooded area just south of South Eklutna Lake Road. Animals had scattered much of the evidence. When Hansen was arrested in 1983 and confessed to his crimes, he acknowledged killing Eklutna Annie and claimed she was his first murder victim. He described her as a topless dancer or a sex worker and thought she may have come from Kodiak, though investigators believe she may have arrived in Alaska via California. Despite Hansen's confession, Eklutna Annie has never been formally identified. In 2021, after Robin Pelkey, known for years as Horseshoe Harriet, another Hansen victim, was identified through genetic genealogy, investigators confirmed Eklutna Annie remains the only unidentified victim. Genetic genealogy efforts were underway as of that year, but as of the last confirmed reporting, she still has no name. A woman was murdered, her killer confessed, and she still has no name. That is one of the most sobering unresolved mysteries in Anchorage's history. Mystery 10. The Deborah Lawson Murder at the Eagle's Nest Hotel. On May 29, 1993, Anchorage police officers responded to the Eagle's Nest Hotel at 4110 Spennard Road. Inside one of the rooms, they found Deborah Ruth Lawson dead from a single gunshot wound to the neck. Witnesses reported hearing an argument just after midnight, followed by a single gunshot, and saw several people flee the room. Detectives interviewed multiple suspects and witnesses. No arrest was ever made. No suspect has been publicly named. More than 30 years later, this case remains fully open, and the Anchorage Crime Stoppers continues to list it among the city's cold cases. Whoever entered that hotel room and fired that single shot has, by all available evidence, never faced a consequence. Mystery 9. The disappearance of Erin Marie Gilbert. In the summer of 1991, Erin Marie Gilbert, a nearly 6-foot-tall young woman who had been living in Alaska for just over a year, enrolled in cosmetology school, and dreaming of becoming a novelist, went to the Girdwood Forest Fair with a date. It was a local music and crafts event, the kind of perfectly ordinary afternoon that should have ended with a drive home. It didn't. According to her date, the car battery died on the way back. Aaron stayed with the car while he went to look for help. When he returned, she was gone. He searched until roughly 1 a.m. before reporting her missing the following day. He was later cleared as a suspect. Girdwood is densely forested terrain south of Anchorage. It's possible Aaron wandered into the woods, but as her family has consistently maintained, that was not something she would have done. Her sister has spent years advocating for attention to the case. Aaron's purse and some of her belongings were eventually recovered, but her remains have never been found. No cause of death has been established, and no one has been charged. As Aaron's sister Stephanie once said publicly, the family has never stopped looking for answers. Mystery 8. The Missing Congressman, Hale Boggs, and Nick Begich. On October 16, 1972, a twin-engine Cessna 310 departed Anchorage International Airport at 8:59 a.m., bound for Juneau. On board, pilot Don Johns, a seasoned aviator with over 17,000 hours of flight time, Alaska Congressman Nick Begich, his aide Russell Brown, and U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs of Louisiana. The flight should have taken about 3.5 hours. The plane's last radio contact was at 9:09 a.m., 10 minutes after departure. After that, nothing. The plane never arrived in Juneau. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in American history at that point. 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, Coast Guard vessels, and a search area of roughly 32,000 square miles. After 39 days, the search was suspended. No wreckage, no remains, nothing. Weather conditions that day were dangerous, and the most straightforward explanation remains that the plane went down in bad weather, possibly icing up in Portage Pass. But nothing is straightforward in this case. Hale Boggs had served on the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and was one of its few skeptics. In 1994, a man named Jerry Max Pasley, serving a prison sentence for murder, told Alaska and Arizona investigators that he had transported a locked briefcase to Anchorage in the summer of 1972, which he was later told contained a high-tech bomb placed aboard the Cessna. Pasley, who married Congressman Begich's widow just 17 months after the disappearance, had documented ties to organized crime figures, including Joe Bonanno Sr. Investigators who interviewed Paisley on the record described his account as at least partially credible. Others remain unconvinced. The bomb theory has never been confirmed, and the crash and bad weather explanation has never been ruled out. The plane has never been found. None of the 4 men aboard were ever accounted for. Mystery 7. The Alaska Triangle's disappearance rate. Anchorage sits at the geographic center point of what's become known as the Alaska Triangle, a vast region bounded by Juneau and Anchorage to the south, and Utqiagvik to the north. Since 1970, more than 20,000 people have disappeared within this region, at a rate more than twice the national average for missing persons in the United States. Some of these disappearances have straightforward explanations. Alaska's terrain is unforgiving, the weather is extreme, and people venture into wilderness areas without adequate preparation. But not all of them. Search and rescue workers who have operated in the area for years have spoken publicly about disorientation and phantom sounds experienced while searching for missing persons in remote sections of the triangle, phenomena they couldn't explain. Experienced rescue pilots have reported compass anomalies. Aircraft have vanished over stretches of terrain that should have been survivable. The region's indigenous peoples, including the Dana-Ina Athabascans of the Anchorage area, have long held that this land carries a spiritual weight unlike other places, that it demands a specific kind of respect that not all who enter it acknowledge. The disappearance rate is documented. The reason for it is not. Mystery 6. The disappearance of Sandra Lee Davis. On August 30th, 1974, Sandra Lee Davis walked away from a trailer in Chugiak, just north of Anchorage, and was never seen again. She was a Mormon mother of 2, who had moved to Alaska from Utah that same year after her husband handed her divorce papers. No car, no phone, no money, and no identification. Her family assumed she'd return, as she'd done in similar moments before. She didn't. Davis was reported missing, and the search found nothing. No trace of her has ever been discovered. No remains, no credible sightings. No explanation for what happened in the hours after she left that trailer. The area around Chugiak in 1974 was remote in ways that are hard to fully appreciate today. But she was also reported to have left on foot, with nothing, which makes the total absence of any evidence in the decades since deeply puzzling. Her case was included in Alaska's expanded cold case list, compiled by the Department of Public Safety. One of over 116 unresolved homicides and suspicious disappearances the state has documented. Whether Davis died in the wilderness, met with foul play, or something else entirely, has simply never been determined. She is one of a long list of Anchorage area residents whose fates remain officially unknown. Mystery 5. Black Jack Sturgis, Anchorage's first police chief. On February 20th, 1921, at approximately 9:15 p.m., Anchorage's first chief of police, John J. Blackjack Sturgis, was found shot in an alley behind what was then the Anchorage drugstore, the same alley that now runs beside the historic Anchorage Hotel. He had been on the job for just 8 weeks. He died at the hospital at 10:50 p.m. with, as one contemporary account put it, his lips sealed and a mystery remaining to be unraveled. The bullet that killed him came from his own gun. No witness saw anyone fire it. The coroner's inquest ruled his death a homicide by unknown parties. Theories range from bootleggers exacting revenge, Sturgis had been cracking down on illegal alcohol during Prohibition, to a gambling operation protecting its interests. Nearly a century later, historians Rick Goodfellow and Laura Koenig conducted an extensive investigation and concluded in 2021 that Sturgis likely died by suicide, pointing to a prior attempt in his youth, a history of family depression, and behavioral oddities on the day of his death, including letters written that afternoon and personal items left behind that he typically carried. If their conclusion is correct, then why the official cover-up? The life insurance policy. Sturgis's wife Anna stood to receive $1,000, money she would have lost if his death were ruled a suicide. Anchorage's founding community, it seems, decided a murder mystery was more palatable than the truth. Whether it was homicide or suicide, the full truth of that night has never been officially established. Mystery 4. The 4th Avenue Theater. Unopened doors and unanswered questions. Built between 1941 and 1947, the 4th Avenue Theater is an Art Deco landmark in downtown Anchorage, a stunning building that has been sitting largely unused since it sustained damage in the 1964 earthquake. Various efforts to restore and reopen it have stalled over the decades. In 2011, a group purchased it with plans to revive it. Those plans have not fully materialized. What's strange about the 4th Avenue Theater isn't just its prolonged dormancy. It's what people report experiencing inside it. Staff and investigators who have entered the building describe a woman's figure seen wandering the hallways, and a man in a black suit and top hat observed in the main auditorium. Multiple independent accounts describe consistent details over years. The bigger mystery, though, is civic. How does a city let one of its most architecturally significant buildings sit in limbo for over 60 years? The 1964 earthquake destroyed or damaged much of Anchorage's early built environment. The 4th Avenue Theater is one of the few pre-earthquake structures that survived and has not been restored. The question of what, or who, is holding up that restoration has never been fully answered publicly. Mystery 3. The Robert Hansen victims who were never found. Robert Hansen was arrested in 1983 after 17-year-old Cindy Paulson escaped his custody at Merrill Field Airport, still in handcuffs, and flagged down help. Hansen, the owner of a local bakery who had cultivated a reputation as a skilled outdoorsman, was subsequently connected to a series of murders stretching back to at least 1971. He confessed to killing 17 women. Investigators flew with Hansen over the wilderness north of Anchorage, and he pointed out burial locations. In 1984, Alaska state troopers recovered the remains of 8 women from those sites. In total, 12 bodies were found. 11 were eventually identified. But Hansen had confessed to 17 murders, and the actual total may have been higher. Estimates range up to 37. The remains of as many as 5 or more victims were never recovered. The wilderness north of Anchorage is vast. Hansen used a private plane to fly victims to remote locations near the Neck River, where he hunted them. Some of those locations he may not have disclosed accurately. Some remains may have been consumed by wildlife decades ago. But some of his victims are still out there, in unmarked ground, without names on a grave. And their families, if any family knew they were gone, never had the chance to bury them. It is a wound that is not closed. Mystery 2. The Brandon Erlmeyer Shooting. On the night of December 2nd, 2017, at 10:41 p.m., Anchorage police received a call about a group altercation on the 7000 block of Howard Avenue. When officers arrived, they found 20-year-old Brandon Erlmeyer dead from a gunshot wound. There have been no arrests. That sentence is the same one that ends so many of these entries, and that's exactly the point. What's notable about the Erlmeyer case is not that it's unique, it's that it's representative. An altercation involving a group of people, a shooting, a young man dead, and then nobody accountable. The APD has appealed publicly for witnesses on multiple occasions. No one has been charged. Erlmeyer was 20 years old. The Anchorage Crime Stoppers case remains open. Anyone who witnessed the altercation that night and hasn't come forward is still sitting on information that could change the outcome. Cases like this, where there were clearly other people present, represent a different kind of Anchorage mystery. Not the kind where there are no witnesses, the kind where witnesses exist and haven't spoken. Mystery 1. The Boggs-Begich conspiracy that won't die. We've already covered the basic facts of the 1972 disappearance, but the top spot belongs specifically to a question that has never been answered, and, because of who was on that plane, may never receive a fully satisfying answer. Was Hale Boggs targeted? Boggs was not just any congressman. He was the second most powerful member of the House of Representatives. He had served on the Warren Commission investigating the Kennedy assassination, and he was privately skeptical of the lone gunman conclusion. He had been publicly at odds with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, calling for Hoover's resignation on the floor of the House in 1971, after accusing the FBI of tapping phones of congressional members. That is not a man without powerful enemies. Jerry Max Pasley's account, whatever weight one assigns it, introduced the possibility that organized crime, specifically the Bonanno family, was involved. The fact that Pasley subsequently married Nick Begich's widow within 17 months of the disappearance is, at minimum, a remarkable coincidence. The fact that a man connected to documented bombings and murder was present in Anchorage around the time of the flight is not nothing. The FBI investigated and could not confirm the bomb theory. The NTSB identified weather and possible aircraft icing as the most probable cause, but without wreckage, without a single physical piece of the plane ever being found, certainty is impossible. A 575-mile flight over Alaskan wilderness in October 1972 vanished without leaving a traceable mark. The 2020 podcast Missing in Alaska, produced by iHeartMedia, brought renewed attention to the case and interviewed investigators who had spoken with Pasley on the record. None of them walked away certain the bomb story was false. Hale Boggs was declared dead on December 29, 1972. Nick Begich was declared dead the same day. Both were re-elected posthumously in November of that year. The plane was never found. The full truth of what happened on October 16, 1972, between Anchorage and Juneau, remains one of the most consequential unsolved mysteries in American political history. And it began and ended in the skies above Alaska. Anchorage is a city that holds its secrets well. The mountains don't talk. The wilderness doesn't give things back easily. And some questions, no matter how long investigators pursue them, simply remain open. If this video gave you something to think about, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. And drop a comment. Which of these mysteries do you think is closest to being solved? Because we're watching.